We know we're getting close. Another sign and type and shadow that's out there, maybe for us to be considering.
Because that's basically the whole thing we're saying here. That's what we did this video is that. So would you say, I guess, that you don't have to be a member of the church to maybe receive some sort of vision or dream about what can be happening to your own religion or what could be happening to your own spiritual advisors and leaders?
Pope Francis, just as I announced in my famous book, Pope Francis, the last Pope, is going to be the last Pope. And people will say, how comes? There's going to be actually a conclave in a few weeks, in 20 days. Well, the next Pope is going to be called Pope for a little while because last year, the Jesuits and Pope Francis prepared a document that sanctions the end of papacy.
Pope Francis and the Jesuits have drafted a document to basically do away with the position of Pope.
Right.
And to make that position more just another one of the 100 and however many cardinals
just
there are,
230
cardinals.
A senior, what's the highest order, bishop or cardinal?
I think cardinal's the highest
okay,
position.
So this would be a senior cardinal, basically. Kind of like the Eastern Orthodox Church has, they don't have a pope, but they have like a senior bishop or whatever.
Yeah, I think it'd be something like that. There'd probably have to be one but it's the idea is that it's going to make it easier to make a one world religion without having the Pope figure in to resist it or to make it an obstacle to make a one size fits all religion.
Okay, so, and this coincidentally enough supports that Catholic prophecy.
Yeah, that's what's really kind of, it sends the hackle up on the back of my neck. Yeah, it's kind of interesting on that to do away with that and to that at some point a pope's going to be appointed, but at some point in the next year or two will step down, and if that 2027 date is when he steps down, that goes back to that Pope prophecy. It's hey, what's good? It's something else.
Don't really know where the world is gonna go, but now everybody knows that you can't stop for too long. Got to keep going. Don't really know where the world is gonna go.
All right, I have Jay Johnson here, jumping. I almost said flapping Jay Johnson, but it's jumping Jay. And he
there
flaps
you go.
too, and he sounds
great.
Flap. He flaps. And where do you work at again? You're on your lunch break, huh?
Yeah, I'm on my lunch break. I work at Hill Air Force Base in Utah.
Okay.
And
so we just had the funeral today for the Pope, right?
Yep. The Pope passed away on Easter, and I was watching, or I received an email from a LDS newsletter that I don't subscribe to their service, but I'm just part of their mailing list, and they talked about this prophecy of the last Pope, and so I had heard others talk about it, so I thought, well, this might be something fun for your roving reporter sensation to come back to the mothership and report.
Absolutely.
So it's known as the last prophecy of the Pope, and it was done by Saint Malachi in the 1100s. And it said that after Pope Francis, the next Pope would be the last one before the apocalypse. So it was intriguing to learn. And it lists like 112 popes. And nearing the end of the list of the popes is one called Peter the Roman, which they attribute to Pope Francis that just died. And
how far does his prophecy go back with the Catholic
to
Church?
To the 1100s.
Wow. And it's to this time right here on the calendar.
Yeah, well, it's not really the year is kind of a little vague. It's more in line with the
succession
names.
of the succession of the popes and the names.
Yeah, the number of the number of the 112 popes, and then nearing the end of the list is Peter the Roman, and then there's one pope after him, and they attribute Peter the Roman to being Pope Francis.
But But where do
And,
they correlate that? Where do they get Peter and Francis together? What?
Well, I guess his like Pope name or not his I guess his name in Italian or in Latin is Giovanni di Petro Bordone, and that's his. I guess it's his name. His name was George Mario Bergoglio.
Hold that
but,
mic a little farther away. It's kind of
I'm sorry. Okay.
No, you're good. You're okay.
Yeah. It's the echo in my car along with that. Okay.
It sounds really good. Just it's very loud though, so you can hold it even further away.
Okay, I'll put it down a little bit there.
There you go.
Okay, so an interesting dialogue. His prophecy year that they put this at was 2027, and so we know the conclave is beginning on May 7th. The church, now that they've had the funeral, is entering the I think it's 15 days of mourning, or the days of mourning maybe started with his death date, and then on the 7th when the conclave will get together, and that's when all the cardinals that are under the age of 80, and I believe there is 120 of them, maybe 138, just looking at my notes, that'll be in there. So it's kind of interesting. But going back to that prophecy, Nostradamus also is said to have done that. Nostradamus was from France,
right,
and had a similar prophecy to Saint Malachi. So anyways, this kind of was funny. But one of the article links that
it was failed. It was a failed prophecy.
No, it kind of parallels this one as Peter the Roman being the second to last pope.
Okay, gotcha.
So kind of a second source there.
So do a lot of let me ask you this. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
Do a lot of Catholics look at this as a prophecy for them?
I'm not sure. This one I actually linked to it I found it on the Drudge Report, which is a fairly well-known thing.
Matt Drudge.
And, you'll see, I think it's from the Express UK, the U.S. edition of the Express UK, which carried this article about it, and then that other article. You'll have the links in the description.
How many links do we have for the description section to tell the folks here?
There'll be, I think, 3.
Okay.
That they can just look at the sources and get into a lot more detail.
Okay.
And then on Monday, Leo Zaccomi, who is a Vatican expert, was on the War Room with the host named Owen Stroyer, and he's always talked about the processes and how the Catholic Church works. He was schooled in the Catholic education system by the Jesuits and things like that, but never really turned to the Jesuits' way of thinking. He's more of a constitutionalist kind of a guy, but he's Italian. He's recently immigrated or became an American citizen and renounced his Italian citizenship. So he's gone to the American way, but he's really, really well versed in there. And there'll be a link to this interview also in the description as one of those links that Troy and I were talking about.
You have to understand that the work that Pope Francis has conducted the last few years has been unprecedented. He has basically rigged the next conclave with 80% of the cardinal electors, which is a very large number, almost unprecedented, if not unprecedented. What does it mean? It means that no matter what happens next, we know that he's going to be a progressive, woke Pope. But this is an historical moment. It's an historical moment because the Pope, one of the last nominations that the Pope did was once again with a Detroit bishop that is an anti-Trumpian. I mean, the U.S. Bishop Conference is fueled with anti-Trump woke bishops who want, of course, to continue this migration effort to transform the United States of America in a Catholic country. Because if you flood this country with Central Americans, South Americans, in the end, you will have no longer a Protestant country, but a Catholic country. You have to understand, though, that the Jesuits have been present here in the United States of America from 1776 all the way till now. But the health of Pope Francis has been in decline for a long time. But up until the last moment, I mean, up until he went to the hospital Gemelli, where he stayed for a few weeks. This is a hospital I know very well, Owen, because I was born in the Gemelli hospital where the Pope went. So this is a hospital I know very well, very close to the Vatican. And the Pope was up until the last minute trying to move around all the various bishops and archbishops that he needed to craft the next papacy. And there is going to be also a surprise in the next papacy, because Pope Francis, just as I announced in my famous book, Pope Francis, the Last Pope, is going to be the last Pope. And people will say, how comes? There's going to be actually a conclave in a few weeks, in 20 days. Well, the next Pope is going to be called Pope for a little while, because last year, the Jesuits and Pope Francis prepared a document that sanctions the end of papacy.
But what are the main takeaways here then?
So just with this, some of the things that, okay, so it ties into the Jesuits, and Pope Francis was the first Jesuit Pope. And what the Jesuits are, for those who aren't really familiar with them, they're an order within the Catholic Church that they really aspire for lots of education, and they wield a lot of power. Global expansion is kind of what they do.
So basically, if people don't understand, the priests and they have kind of their own fraternities, kind of, don't they?
Yeah. That's like a good way to put it.
A guild of priests.
Yeah, and people might know these things. So you've got like the Jesuits, you've got the Benedictines, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Little Sisters of the Poor. Don't laugh at that one, but that's one of them. The Congregation of Holy Cross. There's 51 of these orders within the Catholic Church that the leadership, the fathers, the priests, those things kind of find themselves falling under which one, I guess, best reflects their interests and what kind of mission they want to do in their service to the church and to Christ. And but the Jesuits, over the past time that Pope Francis was been in office, has gained a lot of clout, and they're really, really progressive and woke in their thinking and their philosophies. And so,
wasn't he a Mason? He was a Freemason.
Yeah, he's also a Mason. Yes.
Yeah,
and
there's even pictures of his hand, the Mason in the coat, where he's got his hand inside his coat like that. That's a Mason sign, I guess. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
anyway,
yeah. It's interesting stuff. And but in the last couple years, Pope Francis and the Jesuits have basically created a document that is basically sanctioning the end of the papacy, and the Pope figure will end up stepping down, as it was created by the Roman Church initially, but they're trying to basically do away with the Pope position so that all the cardinals are created equal. And this kind of basically is the early step to kind of going after a one world religion. If they can get rid of the Pope figure, then you have less of that leadership, and it's easier to facilitate those kinds of changes. And so all the Orthodox churches that are out there, except for the Russian Orthodox Church, are sympathetic and are open to Vatican ideas. So they have, in essence, have kind of been infiltrated over the years to have to listen to the things that come out of the Vatican. The Russian Orthodox Church, for whatever reason, just does not really have any ties with the Vatican. So they're really the true.
No. Well, they're the Eastern Orthodox Church. They have nothing to do with Catholicism.
Yeah, and they just don't have a relationship. The Vatican has zero influence over them.
Well, they broke off. I think was it like 1,000 years ago? It was like 1100 AD or something.
Yeah, I haven't researched all that, but it was just really, really interesting to kind of see that they are kind of the lone outlier that Leo Zagomi was talking about in that interview that he did with Schroyer. It's a really, he goes really in depth on it, and so I want people to if I know we're kind of, Jay is a knowledge guy, so
he has all this knowledge, and sometimes it comes out in different places, and that's not an insult. That's actually a compliment, because Jay is amazing and I love him. That's why he comes on. Are we saying, though, in essence, that some believe that this might be, some Catholics believe, even if it's a fringy idea, that that this might be the last pope before the second coming of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, this next one that will be appointed, kind of the way that Leo describes it, that he'll basically be appointed, then at some point he'll step down from being the pope in essence and just be one of the cardinals, and that just kind of leaves the church with one less obstacle in trying to go to a one world, one size fits all religion.
Okay.
He shares the idea that the Jesuits have been the ones kind of pushing world leaders, because they've got so much influence, and have the ears of leaders well, we'll go back to when the EU was established. The Jesuits were hand in hand with them, working to do that. The immigration in Europe, the Jesuits have been in there. They're trying to make the world less Protestant and try to making it more like for example, America, with the immigration we have here. Pope Francis was very pro-immigration, trying to make America less Protestant and more Catholic, to make it easier to in essence go into the mindset of a one world religion.
Okay, so in other words, they kind of call this the Black Pope. This might be.
Well, the Black Pope is the leader of the Jesuits. In fact,
right,
the current.
But will this be a Jesuit, you think?
I don't know. The
Pope Francis was a Jesuit, though.
Jesuit, yeah. Francis was a Jesuit. The three names that Leo Zacomi, in the interview, he talks about two, but on his website, he's got a third one listed now, just since time has passed since that in the interview did with Schroyer on the War Room. But there's three cardinals. Cardinal Peter Turkson, he's from Ghana. He's got a lot of ties to the World Economic Forum, and he's good friends with Klaus Schwab. And he's African, so there's lots of growth going in Africa in the Catholic Church. So they think he's a favorite to possibly be the next pope.
Okay.
Cardinal Wilton Daniel Gregory, he's from Detroit, and he was fairly recently appointed to be a bishop, a cardinal, and he's got strong ties to Obama, and he's very anti-Trump.
Right.
And Pope Francis was basically in essence very resistant to Trump's ideas.
So I want to say this. I want to interject just real quick. So what we're getting at, folks, is that these are progressives. They're globalists, and even Francis was. They feel benign, that what they're doing is benign, bringing on a new world order. Like lots of globalists think that this is the thing to do. So correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, and I know you're going to get to the third one, but are we in essence saying that they want the world to be Catholic, these progressives, not all the cardinals and bishops, but these progressives want the world to be Catholic so they can control the masses with a one world religion? Not so much that they're interested in the theology and the doctrine of Christ in their religion, but more to control the world.
Yeah, you painted it really good. It's really less about Jesus Christ, but more about control. The Jesuits, it's kind of said there's a war between the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church. Say, for example, the Jesuits really focus on gaining more power, where the Roman Catholic Church is it's the church with Christian in it. You know what I'm saying? The Jesuits, they don't really seem to embrace the Christian principles. They're more about church structure and just going about their business.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that in just a second.
Okay, but what's
some of
the third one?
Things.
You were going to get to the third.
Yeah,
one.
the third pope that Leo was talking about was Cardinal Louis Tagle. He's from the Philippines, and the CCP has thrown a bunch of money. The Chinese Communist Party is putting a lot of money and resources into propping him up because he's of Chinese ancestry. So that's kind of an interesting thing there, because the Jesuits, let's see, back in, I'm trying to look at my notes here for it. Back in, I think it's in 2018, they've worked with China to make basically they have a relationship with China in terms of doing I guess, trying to grow their church influence in the Chinese footprint. And Leo goes on to share in his interview. He talks about how the Catholic Church basically sold their self to Satan by allowing the Chinese communists to nominate bishops that fall within that footprint. And I don't know if they're in Hong Kong or where, what principality it is, or whether it's on mainland China, but they rather than having a process of finding guys who have come up through the program to be the cardinals, they just took what the Chinese Communist Party nominated and made them cardinals. So it really irritated Leo Zagomi in his talk there. But
Right.
But just talking a little bit more about the Jesuits, just to give people more background on this and to not bore them to death. But that Black Pope we were talking about is the leader of the Jesuits. They call the position the Superior General of the Society of Jesus. That's what the Jesuits are. It's like they're the Society of Jesus. But they were a big player in putting together the EU, and they're a big player in the Bilderberger group as well. In fact, before Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, his last name before he was Pope was Ratzinger, and Pope Benedict wanted to ring in the Jesuits, and current Pope Francis, our recently deceased Pope Francis, they wanted to put him in to be the head of the Jesuit group during that time, and he didn't want to do it. And so,
okay, hold on. That's
there was
confusing. You said he didn't want to do that. Who didn't?
Yeah,
want
Pope
to do
Francis. Pope Francis didn't want to be put before he was Pope. When he was just the Bishop of the Bishop of Argentina. They wanted him during when Pope Benedict was in, and he was kind of going after the Jesuits, trying to ring them in and to bring them in from being so progressive. Just try to make them step away from their woke and progressive ideas and bring them
Right.
back more into the traditional conservative thinking of the traditional Catholic Church. And so there was a lot of resistance there, and the Jesuits were working behind the scenes to oust Pope Benedict. Pope Benedict, he advocated the position, and in essence stepped down where most popes die in the position of pope. He stepped down and basically retired from being pope and lived out his days. And then Pope Francis, when Benedict advocated, went through the conclave process, had the white smoke come out the chimney, and he was appointed the new pope by the
Right.
thing. So it was kind of a Jesuit coup d'etat kind of a thing to get Ratzinger to resign and be able to put their Bergoglio, who became Pope Francis, in. And so anyways, there's a couple of other little highlights I can just really hit really quick. There's a group called the Saint Gallen Mafia, and what that is, it's actually the Saint Gallen group, but they're called in the Catholic Church the Saint Gallen Mafia. This was a group of progressive bishops and cardinals and archbishops and things that met in a town called Saint Gallen in Switzerland in 1996.
Okay.
And they were all really open-minded guys and progressive guys that really wanted to lead the Catholic Church to where they are kind of today.
Right.
But they reach out to politicians around the world. They actually have used Nancy Pelosi to deliver messages to China in 2018 for them. And currently Bernie Sanders and AOC have had articles published in the Jesuit. I can't remember what their periodical publication is called. It's like the Jesuit Today or something like that. But Leo goes on, talks about these guys as being fifth class Jesuit agents, which means that they've got kind of an alliance with the Catholic Church through the Jesuit order, and they work with them on these kinds of things. And they had Biden, who was a Catholic, who was basically a fifth class Jesuit agent as well. And they were hoping Kamala Harris would get in there. The funny thing is President Trump, he went to Fordham University, and Fordham University is a Jesuit university. Gonzaga University up in Spokane, Washington, is a Jesuit university, and there's others around the country that are Jesuits. And what really has made the Jesuits really hate Trump is that Trump studied religion and philosophy there for the 2 years he was there, and was offered to get into their two different secret societies there. Leo goes into this in his interview, and I can't prove this or anything, but he knows the way that those kind of universities work. And basically Trump declined joining them, but he was able to learn all the Machiavellian things that the Jesuits taught in those religion and philosophy courses that he took, and understands them. And that's why they are so opposed to him, because he knows, in essence, how they operate. He's got their owner's manual.
It's interesting because when I saw you and I talked about how the guy that set up the meeting with, we're not going to say his name or anything because I know he probably doesn't want to, but with President Nelson and President Ballard to meet the Pope. I would like to have him on the program someday, but maybe I won't. I don't know. However, it makes me wonder, when President Nelson and President Ballard are visiting with the Pope and they're so excited to meet him, is the Pope feeling the same way when he's getting this statue of Christ, the little Christus that they presented to the Pope? Is his mindset there, or is he more of just a secret society guy more than he is? It just makes you wonder, what really motivated him to move up in the steps, because he's been known to mention that Christ was just a man, and that not any different than you and I,
Yeah. I think that's a really good observation, Troy. That nature there, where they don't really center their order. It's almost like, we get kind of hung up in church culture here in our LDS church. Hey, should I wear a white shirt and have a missionary haircut and be accepted? It's the small things rather than, centering on the atonement and the sacrament being the important things. I think that the Jesuits have gone off the rails for so long on pursuing those kinds of pursuits. It's kind of like a Don Quixote attacking the windmills, thinking they're dragons. I don't know how to say it, but I don't know how he embraced it. I served a mission in France and attended midnight masses on Christmas, and thought it was such a beautiful service. And I still watch it live from St. Peter's, every Christmas Eve. I'll stay up way late into the night watching it, and you watch the Pope carry the baby Jesus at the end of the mass and put in the nativity. And it's amazing. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah. And just all the
just like the Queen's funeral. It was,
beautiful ceremony, but and it's just interesting. But your point with meeting President Nelson and those kinds of things, it would be really wondered what he was thinking in his brain. It really interesting. But so just kind of just a couple more things to finish up. So Trump has kind of stonewalled him at being a Jesuit, trying to be recruited as a Jesuit agent. And so, those Machiavellian things of being cunning, manipulative, unscrupulous, and willing to stoop to deceit and trickery to achieve your goals, and use propaganda, weren't appealing, I guess. So, but I'm looking at my notes to see if there's anything else out.
Well, the main
go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Bring up your point.
No. You finish, and then I'll ask you something.
Okay, so there was a council that was held in 1962. It's called the Second Vatican Council, and they held it kind of in the fall for a few weeks, like 8 weeks, and it lasted from 1962 to 1965. Then they came up with 16 new documents that changed a lot in the Catholic Church, and a lot of the traditionalists didn't like it because it kind of modernized the church in terms of a lot of things. And so a lot of it they feel was some of that stuff done by that Jesuits' influence, and also that Saint Gallen Mafia, their influence on some of the things that maybe were lost from the church of the earlier part of the
Right.
of the 20th century, and just to kind of encapsulate some of the things the Jesuits did. So if you go back in time, they were founded in 1540, and that was kind of near the time of expansion of Spain and Portugal and those places. And so they partnered with those kingdoms, the Jesuits, to go out and say that they were going to go out and do, in essence, establish the church in these countries like Japan and India and China. And the Jesuits actually took over the Inquisition, the operation of the Inquisition at some point during the run of the Inquisition. But they would go to these countries and set up shop for the Catholic Church, but it wasn't so much to go out and convert people to Catholicism. It was just to set up a power seed in those localities for them to be able to have kind of a base of operations. And so again, being a Catholic order, but not being pushing or trying to teach and evangelize people to the gospel of Jesus Christ, but to gain power.
Right. Gotcha.
In partnership with those countries. So anyhow, that's kind of talks a little bit about the Jesuits there. And so one thing of note, J.D. Vance met with the Pope on earlier Easter Day, and J.D. Vance converted to Catholicism in 2018, so he's fairly new to it, and he's kind of embraced the traditional Catholic Church. And Leo talks about him not being still pretty naive in his Catholic knowledge base. And Mike Pence, at the same time, about a year into the presidency or being vice president of Trump, that's where Mike Pence kind of went bad, after he met with the Pope and became kind of Leo calls him the Judas, and basically became irrelevant after kind of betraying Trump. And so he cautions J.D. Vance to not fall in that same trap. So it's kind of an interesting point, but that interview is really interesting. So I think people who kind of track the last days of this next Pope that's going to be appointed to kind of be the Pope before the events of the apocalypse, is partnering with those Spanish and Portugal empires to establish seeds of power for the church over in there, not so much proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Just a couple other little notes. The Knights of Malta are an organization that many people think are descendants of the Knights Templar, and the Knights of Malta were really a conservative group. And when Pope Francis had started going in this progressive woke thing, they stood up to resist him. And there's a few other, Cardinal Burke and Vigano. Cardinal Vigano was actually excommunicated for opposing the Pope in his progressive march leading the church to the left. But the Knights of Malta were basically kind of taken over by Pope Francis with new leadership and stuff.
What I was going to ask you, are the Knights of Malta, are they conservative? Are they like
Yes.
Are they the antithesis of the Jesuits?
Yeah, they might be considered that. Yes, up until
So
2022.
Have they lost?
That's where Francis. Yeah, they got kind of decapitated with new leadership that falls in line to the march of Pope Francis in 2022. That's where they were. Francis.
Okay.
Ended up taking them over.
Okay. So do you think that Benedict, was Benedict of Malta?
No, he was a Benedictine, actually.
That's interesting because Benedict, well, the Benedictines are also pretty conservative, or are they?
Yes.
So do they have some that are mixed? Do you call these
I don't know
fraternities, or what do you call them? Orders?
Well, they're
Orders.
Catholic orders, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
I'm sure there's 50. I mean, there's 51 of them. The Jesuits are obviously on the progressive left, very outgoing to achieve education and power.
Gotcha. Okay, you finish up what you're saying because I have a couple questions.
Okay, just finishing up. There was a time in before. I'm not sure the exact timing of this, but in 1776, when our country was founded, the Jesuits had been banned from the Vatican at that point. And there was a family in America called the Carrolls. They had a son who was a cardinal. He was the first cardinal in America at that
Right.
time. And they had a brother that was also a founding father who is was part of the Constitutional Convention, I believe. I don't know whether he's a signer of the Declaration of Independence or whether he was in the Continental Congress. But they owned the land where Washington D.C. is now established, and they actually called that land Rome. And it, you look now, we have the monolith there with the Washington Monument. The Vatican's got a monolith. It's just kind of an interesting tie-in there. And the Jesuits, they tried to set up. That's where they set up shop to work in America, was during that time with the Carroll family. So kind of an interesting tie-in.
Yeah,
there.
that is interesting.
Anyways, I didn't have it. Leo just shared a little blip on that. So if there's others out there that want to put stuff in the comments that might know more,
Right.
I've done research on that. But that's basically, this is what I just wanted to share with your audience, Troy. Just do this. But whatever questions you might have to add to the conversation.
So are we saying the main takeaway here is that two things. Do you hear a buzz in the Vatican about no more Pope?
I'm not sure. I think maybe in the inner circles of the Pope's leadership, his close knit guys, the Jesuits that were his surrounding advisors and so forth, that helped him draft that document to basically do away with the papacy after his death. During his last couple of years, Pope Francis and the Jesuits have drafted a document to basically do away with the position of Pope,
right,
and to make that position more just another one of the 100 and however many cardinals
just
there are,
a senior. What's the highest order, bishop or cardinal?
I think cardinal's the highest
okay,
position.
So this would be a senior cardinal, basically, kind of like the Eastern Orthodox Church has. They don't have a pope, but they have like a senior bishop or whatever.
Yeah, I think it'd be something like that. There'd probably have to be one but it's the idea is that it's going to make it easier to make a one world religion without having the Pope figure in to resist it or to make it an obstacle to make a one size fits all religion.
Okay, so, and this coincidentally enough supports that Catholic prophecy.
Yeah, that's what's really kind of, it sends
weird.
the hackle up on the back of my neck. Yeah, it's kind of interesting on that, to do away with that, and that at some point a pope's going to be appointed, but at some point in the next year or two will step down, and if that 2027 date is when he steps down, that goes back to that Pope prophecy. It's something else. We know we're getting close. Another sign and type and shadow that's out there, maybe for us to be considering.
Because that's basically the whole thing we're saying here. That's what we did this video is that. So would you say, I guess, that you don't have to be a member of the church to maybe receive some sort of vision or dream about what can be happening to your own religion, or what could be happening to your own spiritual advisors and leaders?
One more thing to do. Over the past years that Pope Francis has been in office, he's appointed, he's put leftist, left-leaning, progressive type cardinals in there. And so they think that about 80% of the cardinals will be kind of have a leftist view of the world in terms of their things. Okay. So basically the conclave is going to be, kind of a rigged game, because these guys have been put in position and they're under 80 years old and will be, voting for one of their own, send the white smoke up for maybe one of those three that Leo had shared with us, that I shared earlier in our interview here. So that's basically it. That's all I've got, unless you've got anything else for me.
I just want to say this. Basically, folks, what we're saying is, or what Jay is saying is, this is fascinating. How could we pass this up? This is interesting. We talk about the Savior coming. Our prophet Russell M. Nelson is saying the Savior's coming. We also know that in the last days, men will dream dreams, men and women. There's scripture. Isaiah talks about it. Who else talks about it? Where is that scripture that says, that people will dream
Ezekiel
dreams.
and Daniel
Yeah, Ezekiel and Daniel. And it's not just members of the church, and it's not just our prophet. Could President Nelson be the last prophet before the second coming? Or maybe President Oaks or somebody else? Does Jesus Christ, does our Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ love the Catholics? Of course he does. There's lots of them, and a lot more of them than there are us. They love the Savior, and the righteous Catholics will be here upon the earth during the millennium. We know that. There will be many of different faiths of good stature. So could this be the last pope too? Is the Lord trying to send a message to the world? You better watch out. You better not cry. Like Bill Murray said in Ghostbusters, somebody's coming.
That's right. And May 7th is the start of the conclave. They're still in their 15 days of mourning for the Pope. So starting May 7th, start watching for the white smoke to come out of the chimney to announce the new Pope. So this will be kind of fun to watch.
All right.
See if Leo was right and the prophecy.
All right. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, brother. Love you.
All right. Love you
Your audience
too.
is awesome.
Okay. Bye-bye.